Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Mercury, the global challenge. I am involved in mercury emissions monitoring, but only in basically using the data for my own uses. I have never been up a stack and I have never monitored mercury, and for that I apologise. However, I am fascinated how it's done, and I know that it's a very complicated challenge. So what I try to do is act as a mediator between the raw data and what happens to that data. So next slide, please. I work for the IEA Clean Coal Centre, the International Energy Agency Clean Coal Centre, which is a not-for-profit organisation. We have recently rebranded as the International Centre for Sustainable Carbon, which you might regard a little bit as greenwashing, and it is, in that we're expanding, and we're not just doing coal, we're doing biomass, waste uses, anything that we can turn into power based on carbon is what we do. I am in charge of the mercury policy for there. And so I'm going to focus on what we do there and what we do with the data, as I say, that you bring in. Just quickly, just to let you know where the ICSC is. Next slide, please. We are an international technical collaboration program under the auspices of the International Energy Agency. And so as such, we're not profit making, we're not pro or anti-coal, we're simply an idiot's guide to everything you ever wanted to know about coal, we're too afraid to ask. We have a lot of information on our website page. You can register free of charge. Lots of reports, lots of webinars, conferences. We usually run several conferences a year. We look forward to getting back to doing so. So if you're interested, please do register on the website. Next slide, please. You may also be interested in becoming what we call knowledge partners. Now, these are non-paying members of the ICSC. You join up, you put a little logo on our site, we click through to you, you click back to us. And when the world reopens, we hope to involve you guys when it comes to running conferences and so on. When we begin a new report, we will reach out to you for information and case studies and hopefully get some collaboration going in both directions. If you're at all interested in that, obviously that's a long click. It won't click on the screen, but type in ICSC Knowledge Partners into Google and it should bring you to our webpage. Next slide, please. Okay, so why the buzz about mercury? I've had a buzz about mercury for years. It's, let's just face it, it's the best molecule, best element in the world. We're not allowed to play with it live anymore, but a few of us did get to do so in the past. So next slide, please. In the early 90s, the United Nations defined mercury as the pollutant of greatest global concern at that point, in the fact that it was the volume of mercury in the environment was increasing and nothing was being done about it. And so they established the Minamata Convention, named after the location in Japan where the Chiso contamination of methyl mercury was at its worst. There's actually a film on Netflix with Johnny Depp, which I'm not exactly recommending. It's not his best film, but it does cover the Minamata background if you want to watch it, how there was denial for the company that this pollution was happening for decades. So because of the strong neurological damage and the great concern over mercury increasing the environment, this convention was set up. And as part of that, I feed into the coal partnership. I lead that. So we've been very involved with defining the BAT-BEP, as they call it, the best available technology and practice for reducing those emissions. At the moment, there are 130 countries joined up to the convention. We have a lot of working groups on that, and everything is downloadable from the Minamata Convention website, including what's on the left there is the text of the convention. It's only around 35 pages long, so it's actually quite a simple read if you want to catch up on what's happening there. And Article 8 is the one that concentrates on emissions from coal combustion and other stationary sources. So next slide, please. So if you're a signatory to the convention, obviously your duty is to therefore evaluate your emissions, and how they phrase it is to control and, where feasible, reduce emissions of mercury. You've got a lot of emerging economies and developing regions wanting to be engaged in this, but the challenge of promising to reduce emissions in the near term is obviously a lot for them. And so there's control, become aware and manage emissions of mercury built into the text. For many of these countries, the challenge is starting. How much mercury are they emitting already? Are they big emitters or are they not big emitters? And for them, signing up to deliver reductions They want to know what their starting point is. And that's where we need the raw data. Now, within the text guidance, there is an inventory production guidance document, which tells you how to estimate emissions from your sector, such as coal. And those are, of course, based on emission factors. Now, emission factors are magical things. The magic numbers, you multiply them by the amount of activity used in that. So if there's a value for coal, you multiply it by the amount of coal you burn. That's your emission. It's good as a basic starting point, but it's not ideal when it comes to determining policy based on those numbers. So next slide, please. As I Googled this, I have no idea where James Harrington is, but he said how important measurement is. If you can't measure it, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. That's why we need actual numbers for mercury emissions when we're talking about reducing emissions globally for the global challenge. Next slide, please. So this is how we do inventories. There are basically two ways of doing it, top down and bottom up. Now, most inventories are top down. That is, you take the total amount of coal you burn, you multiply it by your emission factor, and you get your that can take in a retention factor. For example, for coal combustion, some of the mercury might end up in the ash or in the FGD waste. You multiply those numbers together and you get one value for your whole fleet, which is okay, but when you're defining policy, that's not enough. So what we prefer to do is a bottom up. And that means that you're using an activity value, the energy output or the coal use for each individual plant or unit. Where possible, you're going to include a specific emission factor for that coal. It can just be the coal mercury content. And you're including a plant-specific retention factor. Does it have an ESP? Does it have FGD? Put that in there. And then you're getting an actual value for emissions for each of those units in turn. So you'll know which ones are the big emitters and which are not. That, of course, relies on the raw data on mercury that you can bring to us. Next slide, please. So even when we can't get emissions monitors out on this fleet, by using these emission factors based on beta data, we can get a handle on how emissions are and what to do about them. Next slide, please. And this is what we've been doing. I've been working with the United Nations Environment Programme and the US Department of State, who have very kindly given us an awful lot of money to do work in emerging economies. We have done inventories for China, India, Indonesia, Russia, South Africa, Thailand, and Vietnam. And what we did in those situations, we couldn't put monitors on all the plants. What we did do was analyse their coal in great detail. We got them to do the analysis of the raw coal, but we also sent off duplicate samples off to the US Geological Survey to validate those data. At the same time, we chose as many plants as we could. In most cases, it was only 3 or 4 plants, and we sent guys up there with sorbent traps. In one case, the Indonesians preferred to use the wet chemistry. Good luck to them on that. They did it very well under the circumstances. And we get then an emission factor for that plant based on the coal going in and the mercury coming out. Much better emission inventory. And then you look at the plants that are similar in that region and you can build up an inventory based on unit by unit. Next slide, please. What we've also included, and I cannot recommend this little thing highly enough, it's called the IPOG, the Interactive Process Optimization Guidance Tool. We developed it, Steve Nix at Energy Associates in America produced it for us. It was funded by Environment Canada, and it's free through our website and through the UN Environment website. If you want, I can send you the link. The issue with it is it's a little exe file, and so if you download it, your computer goes absolutely mental, and you have to mop its fevered brow, convinced that this is not a virus or anything. And what it is basically it's a funked up Excel spreadsheet in which we have put at the back end data for mercury emissions from over 2,000 plants. The information collection request in America, we have all the data of the coal going into the plants in America and the mercury coming out. And we know what each of these plants have in terms of control technologies and so on. And when we did the studies in Thailand, China, Russia, and so on, we also put this data in the back end of this machine. And it is so easy to play with, and it is so useful. Next slide, please. Actually, sorry, can we go back to that slide? My apologies. On the right there is a screen grab of the iPog, and honestly, please do download it and play with it. It's so simple. You're clicking through little choice boxes along the top of the system there. You're telling it your coal. If you know what your coal concentration of mercury is, you can type that in there. Coal, sulfur content, ash content. If you don't, you can choose an example high sulfur coal or whatever and plug that in there. You can do a single blend or a multiple blend of coal, tell the volumes of each. You tell it what kind of boiler you've got. You've got no NOx burners, have you just got a plain boiler, crossfire, whatever. What's the efficiency of your boiler? What's the ash output? If you know these things, you can put them in. If not, you can just choose this sort of generic system. You can tell it if you have an ESP or a baghouse. Plug it all in there. It takes less than 3 minutes to put this data in. I've made it sound complicated. It's not. And then you pick the little calculate button and it'll give you the results. And so for those of you that can read this, I can't, it's tiny on my screen. I think this is an example from the Suralaya plant in Indonesia, which only has an ESP in it. It has a relatively high mercury coal and not much chlorine, so you're not getting much mercury oxidation in there. And so the amount of mercury coming out of this plant is basically most of it, over 95% of the mercury is scooting through the plant and coming out the other end, which of course is not a good thing. So without even getting up from my seat, I can go back into this iPog system and I can say, okay, what would happen if I were to fit an FGD in this plant? What would happen if I was to blend a high chlorine coal, throw some bromine in there? And I can pretend that I've done that, the plant, and it will calculate emissions based on that behavior. And it's pretty good. It's really good. I mean, for Suralaya, you've got to throw quite a lot of things at this plant to get it to work, but bromine will get you up and over 50% mercury control quite quickly. Next slide, please. So what we have done is we've done this in Indonesia. We've gone through unit by unit, the over 400 units, over 100 plants, over 100 megawatts, spread over the 40,000 islands, 17,000 islands, sorry, of Indonesia. And for each of those, we have the plant size, the location, the coal going in. They have done coal analysis. We know where they have ESPs, baghouses, and so on. And we've put all in that, and we've calculated plant by plant the mercury emissions. Plugged it into our model, and next slide, please. We can get some very nice results. I'm not going to talk you through this. Basically, these are the top 30 or so mercury emitting plants in Indonesia out of the over 100 plants. So what we can see is the top 15 or so units are actually emitting way more than the rest of the fleet. They're in fact emitting more than 50% of the total emissions of the fleet over the remaining fleet lifetime. So if I was sitting here as the Ministry of the Environment and Forestry in Indonesia, I would say, look, rather than coming in and demanding that all our coal-fired power plants put best available technology for mercury on, it actually makes a lot of sense to target these top emitters straight away. It's far more cost effective. We could be wasting money by putting control technologies on the smaller units to achieve virtually no mercury control. And so this is my point, the power of information, the power of knowledge when it comes to defining policy based on measurements of mercury. Next slide, please. If anyone's interested in the Indonesia study, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. There is a webinar on my website, on the Clinical Centre website. You can watch from March that explains mercury and the Minamata Convention and the emissions from coal. In the middle, we have a 90-page report. Uniper was involved in this report, looking at the emissions from the Indonesian coal sector, giving all that data from the plants that I've talked about. And finally, on the YouTube channel, there was a 3-day meeting we held back in March, April, and you can see that full presentation over 3 days if you like. It was 2 hours a day involving the ministries in Indonesia and discussing how they plan to move forward with the data we have provided to them. Next slide, please. If you are interested, and I know that maybe 1 or 2 of you are curious about mercury emissions from coal, we plan to get out there early next year to visit 3 plants we have picked from the top high emitters. Python is a wet FGD plant. Suralaya is the one I talked about. It's an ESP, but it's one of the biggest plants in Indonesia. And also Ombolin, which is an older unit, which is well and truly due an upgrade very soon. an inefficient plant, we believe it has an mercury emission factor orders of magnitude over the rest of the fleet. So it'll be really fun to get into that plant. And we want to take anyone that's interested in this with us to Indonesia. We'll go out, get our boots dirty and visit these plants, and we will come up with proposals for reducing those emissions. We're hoping to get a little bit of US TDA funding to do some demonstration project development work. However, if that does not happen, we still hope to have perhaps 2 pages of proposals from different people in the mercury control industry to put into a catalogue for the Indonesian government to consider when moving forward with their control strategies. So if you're interested in that, please do get in touch. Next slide, please. In addition to the work we've done or doing in Indonesia, we're also working in India. We have 3 pillars of work over there for the State Department, but the first one is, of course, going to be of most interest today, so I'll focus on that. And that is evaluating the status of emissions monitoring in India right now. Next slide, please. India, as we know, is a huge country, hundreds of coal-fired power plants out there. And I don't know if a lot of you know, but they actually have a legal requirement to put continuous monitors on every single one of those units. SOx, NOx and particulates have to be on there, presumably within the next couple of years, because the norms start applying very soon. Those SEMs have to be linked directly to the Central Pollution and the State Pollution Control Boards, giving live information. Now, for a country that's only just introduced emission standards for sulphur and nitrogen, it's had particulates for a while, this is a huge leap forward in terms of technology requirement and skills requirement for the country. They have these SEMs set up, and we've seen the data. Data are coming in. However, how valid are those data? We know that the equipment themselves is obviously, a lot of the time, is MCERT certified. Indonesia is going down the certification route. However, we are more concerned about the staff operating those systems. How are they being maintained? Are they being calibrated correctly? Are they being positioned in the right place? All those things that, you might have the best bit of equipment in the world, but unless you've set it up properly, it's not going to give you the right data. So we want to get in there and make sure that that's actually happening. And that's what we're doing right now. We're looking at what India is doing. We know that there are only 10 or so training courses run in India. That is single one-off events that have been run over the last 5 years. So we know the staff are not getting the training they require to operate these systems. And so with funding, we hope to get out there and deliver that training, and we hope some of you will come with us. Next slide, please. What we want to do is we want to focus on the calibration. We know that's happening remotely. We want to make sure that it's happening correctly remotely. Quality control and quality assurance, it might be going well, but until we see confirmation that it's going well, we want to make sure that we can help. We know that NTL is moving forward with MCERTS type certification for the equipment. We want to start a certification scheme, MCERTS based or whatever based, for the staff. So we want to go out there and train some trainers so that they have capacity building for emissions monitoring control. It will include mercury monitoring in the long run, but their emission limit for mercury at the moment is 30 micrograms per cubic metre. And so for the most part, it's not a challenge. They're not focusing on that so much as on the NOx and SOx. Next slide, please. So if you're interested, do reach out. I think my email address is at the end, or you can get me through the swap card. We are genuinely looking for people who are experts in training and capacity building for SEM operation to take with us out to India. We want plan 4 one-week workshops in 4 different regions of India, and we have to get this done within the next 18 months. So please do reach out, and we will have some funding for travel. We can't take you all, but it would be great to have a pool of experts for me to choose from.